So a few years back, Adam McKay put out a movie called The Big Short. I liked it a lot back then, and when I rewatched it maybe a month ago, I loved it. The writing is sharp, the cast is great, the editing is fantastic. I loved it. So when he was coming out with this, with some of the same cast, I got pretty excited. But then I heard whispers that it might not be that great of a movie. And I sorta curbed my expectations, but I still hoped it would be great. Because the ingredients are there. Unfortunately, people were kinda right. It's not that great. At least comparatively. And I don't really like doing direct comparisons between two movies. But The Big Short and this have too much in common not to. They're made by the same guy. They have the same based on a real story thing going on. The writing feels very similar. The editing and how it's put together feels similar. I mean, even Christian Bale and Steve Carell are back. So I think it would be almost absurd not to compare them. But I think the big difference here is that this one only follows one character, Dick Cheney, whereas The Big Short had a myriad of characters doing different things. And that kept it a lot more interesting. The other big difference is that, and they even admit it at the beginning of the movie, Dick Cheney has always been a super secretive person. There's not a lot of info out there about his private life and what he's like behind the scenes. So you sorta have to make things up, fill in the gaps, embellish and just try to make it work. But when it comes to The Big Short and the housing bubble, there's a lot of information out there about it and the people involved in it. And unfortunately those differences make this a lot less interesting and engaging. That's not to say that this is a bad movie. I actually really enjoyed it. It's fun, it's crazy, it's kinda disturbing. But it ended up feeling really long. Especially the last part just dragged on and on. And that's not an issue I had with The Big Short, even rewatching it. And they're almost exactly the same length too. But there were just so many more moving parts in that one. Different things keeping it interesting. Whereas in this, it's almost all on Cheney. But then again, I have to admit that Christian Bale in this is fantastic. I don't know how he does it, but he just manages to impress me every time. And I mean, his physical transformations are crazy and all that, but I'm just talking about the acting. He's so incredibly good. And he's the perfect guy to play Cheney too. But I was actually surprised by how great Carell and Sam Rockwell were too. I didn't even know Rockwell was in this, but he plays Bush and he's perfect. Carell plays Rumsfeld and he's great too. I love them both in this. But I also gotta give it up to the makeup team, because they nailed it. One of my pet peeves is actually old man makeup. It's almost impossible to get right. It just comes across as robbery and distracting. But in this it's not. And they age quite a few actors in this, not just Bale. And they're all convincing. No idea how they did it, but they did it. They got the de-aging right too. So that impressed me a lot, and I'm not sure they're nominated for an Oscar, but they definitely should be, and should probably win too. And I know it might seem like I wasn't a huge fan of this movie, as a whole, but I did like it quite a bit. And I liked almost all the individual parts of it, and loved a lot of them. But it's really when compared to The Big Short where this just doesn't hold up. It's too similar, but not as good. So it just feels like Adam McKay was just trying to recreate the magic of the first movie. And maybe it's an unfair comparison. Maybe I should just judge it on its own merits. And if I try to do that, it's a really good movie, with great performances, great makeup, creative editing, and a lot of subtle humor. But it drags and feels too long, especially in the latter part. It just felt like it lost its focus a bit, didn't feel as snappy and concise. And I get it, you're trying to tell the life story of a man you know almost nothing about, and you're trying to condense half a century into 2 hours. What do you include and what don't you? What's important and what's not? Where do you embellish and where do you just skip ahead? What do you focus on? What's the center of the narrative? It's probably not an easy thing to do, but I think they could have done better. I don't know if the problem was the script or the editing, but it needed a little bit of polish. But would I recommend it? Yeah, no doubt. Check it out. Or don't. I'm not your dad. But I am trying to sell out, so consider liking, subbing, hitting that bell and supporting me on Patreon. Because I really need that ranch in Wyoming. And hey, why not drop a comment below or check out another review? I'd really appreciate it. Thanks.